Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Mulder, and tonight I have a very special guest. I will not attempt to pronounce his last name, but I will call him Velan. And it's a pleasure to meet you, my friend. And I know time is short, and you're a very busy man. Could you kind of give the audience a little bit of background and what you'd like to cover tonight?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for having me, right? So you pronounce it Drachenblut, but just call me Wieland or say Valand, which is the US
Valen,
version of that. But
Valen.
okay,
Okay. All
yeah,
right.
cool.
Okay.
So I'm a scientist, right? And we've been working since quite some time on your stuff because my area is basically techno-shamanism. I'm deeply interested in both the technical aspects and, of course, into field studies, understanding various groups, understanding various individuals, and yeah, because it's a totally under-researched area and a very fascinating one, which has a very deep background, right? And so, yeah, you asked me for a podcast. I said, okay, why not? Let's go a bit into it because I think it's a very interesting stuff that we have to talk about.
Mhm, mhm. So, what is the first thing you'd like to talk about tonight?
I am really fascinated by the Tepaphone. And it
Hmm.
has something to do with it has a history, right? So maybe you can tell me something from your perspective, and I can illuminate a bit
Oh, no
further into
pun,
that.
no pun
Yeah.
intended. Yes, here's what Uncle Chuckie told me, Charles Casamano, and
Right.
uh, and we worked together to start incorporating the Tepaphone into radionics. And his big thing was to uh, use the Tepaphone as a carrier wave. And I asked him, okay,
Mm,
what was the history of this? Where did this all come from? And he told me that magicians back, 100 years ago, maybe even longer, would take
mm,
uh, would take a uh, I don't know, like a kerosene lantern or a lantern of some kind, and they would put a
mm,
sigil in front of the lantern and project it towards, say, a painting of
mm,
an individual that they would like to, help or whatever. And that's what they did. And so what they were trying to do was use the light. They would try to energize the light, I guess, with whatever ceremonies they were going to use, and put that
mm,
energy into the light and use the light as a carrier wave, which would project this sigil or whatever they were using for their practice.
mm.
Now, what
Yeah,
do you
very
know?
funny. Well, where do we get started? I mean, I know we've been talking for ages about Charles Cosimano, about your studentship with him, right? And I'm still deeply in awe to finally find someone who is really on the law of a long chain. So, but this may be something we you and I talk, or we maybe talk later somewhere,
Yes,
because
I
this
would
is
say that is true.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and also I know that a lot of things that you're not supposed to talk about. I totally respect that, right? Because so here's the thing, basically, if you look into the Tepaphone, at least the first time that it appears was in a novel called Frabato the Magician from Franz Bardon, and which was basically written. I think the first notes were jotted down in Czech, and then it was translated into German because it was a time when Germany and was still the German Reich, and there were some parts of Czech Republic nowadays that were totally under their dominion, and basically everyone spoke Czech, and also the Germans and the Czech have a long cooperation history together. Dominion history as well, because the first German-speaking university actually was Prague, right? And so where you had also Rudolph II, where you have John Dee and Edward Kelly, and there was a lot of magic going on, very rich Jewish tradition as well with the Golem of Prague. So very interesting, very powerful country. And so basically, and Franz Bardon was a kind of stage magician and healer, you would call him today.
Hmm.
And in a very tragic time and series of events, and he ultimately died in prison. Actually, not in a Nazi prison, but in communist prison. But what happened was that in the time he was active, he was very uh, influential. He was a stage magician. He loved the audience. He loved to be in the center of things, and he made a lot of allegations of his magical abilities. And nowadays, you would say that a lot of the things that he describes are what magicians today talk about, or shamanism or folk shamanism talks about, specific stages of transgeneration, or what people nowadays would talk about more kind of yoga practices and so. But where does he got his mojo from? Because he's basically talking a lot of things that he is a very illuminated being that was taught by old masters. But even if you look into his belongings that were very long kept by his son Lumiere, was basically that in those belongings there were from a magical order in Germany, which had strong ties with Aleister Crowley, the infamous magician from the UK. They were basically, he was more or less in touch with them. The question is whether he was directly taught by them, or they were very famous for their journal. They had a kind of magical journal that they sent around to interest people, or were just in touch with by having subscription to these journals, and then basically maybe a broader Theosophian connection. So this is a bit unclear. But as a matter of fact, in this area, there were other people from the Fraternitas Saturni as well, for example, Master Daniel. And they basically spoke about a kind of ominous entity called the Freemasonic Order of the Golden Century. And so the idea is that you have 99 members, and they must be people in public light. They must be well-trained occultists. They must be rich already. So I don't know which world he lives, but I don't think that there are too many people of this kind out there. But maybe I'm mistaken, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So allegedly, there are 99 lodges of this around the world. Each of them has basically 99 members, and the 100th place is the place of Satan, so to speak. Although Master Daniel spoke about that another entity from the Goetia, I think Belphegor, was basically what they were attached to, which is a bit strange because it wouldn't fit from the etymological and folk description of what Belphegor is and what they do. But anyhow, I digress. The point is basically that they allegedly were in possession of a Tepaphone. Now, if you look into the original German text, and if you look into there's unfortunately no Czech original left, but if you look into translation, English, French, and other languages, you see there has been a change, because in the English languages, they speak about a kind of special oil that has been illuminated, and then through this oil, you would have some sort of projection, and then maybe some kind of sigil or magical symbol that has been projected onto a target. Whereas in the original in German, which again is most likely closest to his original notes in Czech, he speaks about some electrical fields that have been turned on. Anyhow, this ominous device, the Tepaphone, is a kind of projection device. And this is where it gets really interesting and piqued my interest, actually, because this kind of projection device seemed to be like an early 19th century iteration of the idea of connecting electricity and the upcoming information technology with magical practices. And this is exactly my field of research, and therefore I'm so intrigued by it. So, and allegedly they use this as a kind of magical weapon to basically influence people, remotely kill people, and get things done. And they also used trance to induce trance in mediums, for example. And then they had either a medium going, as they call it, astrally, which they mean like a kind of travel that is an outside body experience, where they basically have a person sitting in the room and then hypnotizing it, and then it in their worldview, so to speak, are able to then project the ghost of this medium towards a target and remotely hypnotize the target and do certain things. Of course, in the novel, it was all nefarious in nature. But with this Tepaphone, they said they would be able to do the same thing, which is interesting. And so then they describe it very vague, but it must have been a kind of toroid entity. It must have had some kind of field in the middle where you place a target, you would most likely call it. And then people were standing in circles around that, projecting their thoughts of what they want, which is again very nefarious in the novel. and basically, and then want to achieve things, and then only through specific measures, this hero of this novel, which is the impersonation of Franz Fanon, was then able to basically escape. But I digress. The point is basically that this Tepaphone is very interesting, and as far as I know, Uncle Chuckie was not necessarily just this nice uncle working on machines, right? But from what you told me,
Yes, he had a lot, you know, he a lot of what he knew he really didn't make public, and it's it, it's interesting. I'll just leave it at that. It's interesting.
right, right. Because if you look further, what happens is that those, let's call it mind control experiments, they were very heavily starting in the Soviet
Hmm.
area.
Yes.
They were conducted by Nazis, Nazi scientists,
Hmm.
who then basically, through Operation Paperclip, made their way to the US.
Hmm.
Then also some other people that conducted kind of population control experiments. For example, we talk about, in to some degrees, even people from the Frankfurt School, but this is a bit different, basically, from the Institute at Columbia University. It's basically a kind of idea that with the means of technology and mass persuasion, you are able to create specific outcomes. And those outcomes can either be in, let's call it the collective psyche, in terms of, for example, that people want to go to war, people like someone or hate someone, or they could be in an individual. And we all know about the stories about Manchurian candidates or so, or stories about people up to Charles Manson, right? But basically, or this uh, Ted Kaczynski, that the Unabomber, who
Right.
basically were I couldn't say victims, guinea pigs of those experiments, but they were in one line. And if you look at the tools that have been used, and I heard from you that Uncle Chuckie got a lot of sources, partially from governmental agencies, and partially from certain structures, lodges he was involved with, right? And so this is very interesting because many of those, I know you can't talk about it, but many of those structures also had similar connections. So take, for example, Aleister Crowley's stream, or take Scientology and look into the origins where this L. Ron Hubbard was meeting with someone who was a member of the Order Templi Orientis, which is the order created in Germany out of all places, and then basically taken over by Aleister Crowley. And so again, they use machines, like they have their auditing sessions, and people hold some kind of electricity meters basically, and have a kind of a session where they go through specific times in their life. And
Hmm.
then if there's a kind of emotionally loaded memory, allegedly there is a reaction, right? And so if you look into modern psychiatry, which is the enemy of Scientology, or from their point of view, right? I think most psychiatrists don't even know about it, but they use comparable tools. And so it's very interesting that you have this explosion of, let's call it, mind technology that started.
Right.
But if you look into the traces, you have a connection with shamanism, with occultism, and you basically have the overlap of, let's say, governmental structures, like in this case with Uncle Chuckie, plus we have Charles Cosimano, plus we have, let's say, a spiritual, occult, magical streams that are as well very often connected with governmental agencies, if not even causing some of them. And
Yes, yes, and I, like I said, I think I've made this public, and even Chuck said this, that his greatest fans were generals, military generals, and I always wondered, who did he write the book Psionic Warfare?
mm,
Where did that, you know, where did that come from? But anyway, that's just me. Anyway,
I mean, from a scientific point of view, most of his books are a combination of self-help literature with a kind of home do-it-yourself machinery stuff, right? And he's a bit like he seems to have a kind of anarchist background, so it's very interesting to see that. I wouldn't go that far, but it could be just a kind of either a pretense or a rudimentary effect of what he has been working on. I don't know, right? So, but
Right.
the point is, let's go back to the Tepaphone, because I think the Tepaphone is a very interesting device. Because
Mhm.
as far as I know, these days, Charles Cosimano, his teacher, you told me about his teachers, right? So let's don't go there, but let's go not to the teachers and the structures of where Charles Cosimani got his stuff from, but let's talk about what he thought and what you think about the Tepaphone. Can you go a bit deeper into your perspective of it?
I'm very pragmatic about things. Does it work or
Mm,
doesn't it work? I mean, it's just the way I'm wired.
mm,
That's just the way I am. And once I understood, okay, what's going on behind the Tepaphone, I took all this magic stuff out of the scenario. That was irrelevant to
mm,
me. Okay, all I want
mm,
to know is, will this thing function as a carrier wave toward a target or a witness, whatever terminology you want to use. Um,
mm,
for for the where does this thing go? Where do you want to
mm,
direct this energy to? And
mm,
I went through many variations of this with Chuck until we found one where he was basically happy about the situation, but it still required a lot of tweaking. I mean, back in the old days, it was. I'm trying to, Chuck is showing me these things that he put together himself, and he'd buy like toy helmets for science fiction. He'd buy a hard hat from the local hardware store or what have you,
mm,
and try to and put together these things. And was it was just basically prototype stage is what it was. And I had to go through this and under his guidance I actually refined and refined and refined, and as a result I think especially your input on the latest version of the I'm gonna have it released yet. The latest, but the newest thing is, I think your input on that was invaluable, by the way. And uh, but this, you know, with this uh, technology with the Tepaphone, basically all I look at it just point blank. You're putting an input signal into the light. The light takes that signal, is embedded into the light as it is projected toward the target or toward whatever, uh, you know, place or thing or person that you're trying to influence with the Tepaphone. It's just, I really don't think of anything more of it than basically the output plate of a machine. It's just you're using a different method to get to the same destination.
mm, mm. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think what you are referring to is you have this product which is a helmet or so, right?
That
And
is correct.
since I happen to have been working because I was interested in the more neurological aspects of techno-shamanism with a lot of cognitive neuroscience and brain scientists.
Right.
I got some input from them, and then I say, hey, why not taking it to the next level? If I know something that you could know, and then basically I guess that you will show the new iteration of the helmet very
Yes.
soon. So
Yes. It was an excellent collaboration, one of many. And
thank you.
and I just like the fact that you and I are able to, we understand each other and we're able to work together.
Yeah, it's very surprising to me. So I still suggested this, but hey, it was always fun to apply science also to some ways, right? So it's
Yes.
very fun because especially we now take basically we did a kind of statistical models and we used some AI to come up with the proper constellation of certain things. The electronics have been changed. But the idea that basically we take knowledge from cognitive neuroscience, which brain area is where, and then of course from occult science, where we think about that the specific energy center is and how this could be taken up and turned further. But let's don't digress. I think you will talk about this. It was just like I saw this with some people. And I thought it's
Now let's
nice
go
to
ahead and
help you
talk
as a
about it.
kind
You're
of
on a roll.
yeah,
You're on, Balin, you're on a road roll. Let's do this, please. Proceed.
right. Yeah, but here's the thing basically that if I look into the Tepaphone, and so especially the iteration of the Tepaphone with the helmet, which I think is the absolute the evolution of the Tepaphone, of what you have been working on, is the idea that you could change reality. This is a very old idea, and some people, at least in my field, believe that the first indications of this were the cave paintings
Hmm.
in the Stone Ages, where basically people used technology, in this case, paint, like ashes or stone-based paint, to basically project onto the walls, illuminated by the light of the fire, which is something totally artificial. No other animal does this.
Hmm.
Basically, projected hunt. And there is some people who believe, and I admit it's not too far from at least a chain of thoughts that has been permanent throughout basically recording of humankind, that basically we see something like in those let's say in those paintings, not the history of that someone did a hunt, a successful hunt,
Hmm.
but we saw that people painted the desired outcome of the future. So some people believe, therefore, that cave paintings basically are the first indication of techno-shamanism. So you take the fire, you take the energy from the fire, you project it onto the wall, and you project your desire for the next day, maybe that you will go out and hunt the big mammoth.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And we now think that is a recorded history, but in reality, the causal chain has been different. Right. And so, in many ways, if you look into then what happens, take the Bible, and we talk about when we talk about specific tools that have been described, right? And so you see very often that what people basically talk about is a kind of technical device, right? So if you take the Ark of the Covenant, so which is maybe the most obvious one, you have some kind of device, and people had to wear specific things, right? And basically, and it has some kind of mechanical structure. And again, some people try to interpret into this some sort of technical tool.
Hmm.
Maybe it has been. Maybe it was just a very uh, solemn way of showing reference to the Holy Scriptures, right? But the point is basically that you always find a combination of of the artificial. There's a very famous book, The Sciences of the Artificial, which is a highly recommended read, by the way, and where you basically have the desire to reach something, and then there are the two ways, so to speak, the ceremonial, the priestly way, the magicians or whatever, and you have the technicians. And there is who create things, right? The engineers, and then you have something in the middle which is totally under research, right? The combination of the two, where people really believe that the machine is an emanation of the divine, and on the other hand, the divine inspires the maker and then creates a machine. And some people believe that, for example, the Ark of the Covenant or stuff like this could have been first devices of this sort, right? And again, you always have the idea, the combination of light, of or energy radiation, of information transmission that then hits a reality, and through this basically alters reality with a specific outcome that someone is interested in. And
Yes.
in a way, you see from the cave painting up to MK Ultra experiments, a kind of line that is unbroken, right? And this is
Yes.
a very interesting.
Yes. And you and I, we've had many conversations, and I always said, the magic is you. You have
Hmm.
the magic. And I realize this. I would say 99.9% of the operations that I do, I don't. I'm a really good, a good close personal friend of a gentleman by the name of Michael, and
Hmm.
everybody around the world seems to know him, and
Hmm.
he and I, we've done a lot of work together, and I'll call on him on certain operations. But I will say that 99% of the operations is merely just me projecting my intent as I turn the dials into the universe and
Hmm.
let the machine do the job. The machine is the magic. It's just an extension of your consciousness because it is
Hmm.
because you are magical. It is magical.
Hmm. I consider this a bit like a very good musical instrument, right?
Yes.
So you can take any moron and put any moron in front of a Steinway or in front of a Stradivari or whatever, and so
Hmm.
basically, and they then play, they can't play, right?
Right.
You have to be able to play the instrument, and then it amplifies your ability by a specific magnitude and has an effect in terms of music, of course, on the listener, right?
Hmm.
So in a way, you have this spiritual technology, and think about simple things you have in the Islam country, the muezzin, who is basically shouting through these days
Uh-huh.
loudspeakers.
Hmm.
What else is this but techno-shamanism? You
Exactly.
have specific ways that the churches are built. And this brings us back to ideas of, for example, the Knights Templars, which then leads to some degrees back to specific magical orders, some affiliations of Charles Cosimano, right? So it's very interesting how this world is intertwined, right? That you basically have a specific architecture that helps you achieve specific outcomes. It's a technology, right?
Hmm.
You create technology and you use technology to have an influence on people. And
Hmm.
technology in this case can be it can be basically psychological in nature, it can be chemical in nature, like think about fumigation, right? Or it can be electrical slash by fire, some degrees of fire, which
Hmm.
is I think one of the most interesting ones, because Tepaphone is there, right? So you have information that is transmitted through energy and then hits something, so to speak. But the question, does it hit something, right? Because some people believe in this quantum entanglement, that you do something and you connect the instrument with another part, so to speak, of the world, and through your change, you have a change there. Whether it's backed up by physics or not doesn't matter in this case. But the point is that you always have the idea of you connect yourself maybe to the divine, if not, then to the world
Hmm.
through the divine by help of a machine. So the machine itself becomes a part of the divine. Isn't that funny?
Yes, that is I think that you've walked into what I would consider the true secret of radionics. I think you just walked into it.
Right. And then we talk about that the first universities, basically, I see we're running slowly out of time, 10 minutes left, right? That basically the first universities were founded by the church. Very interesting, right?
Right.
But I think that I know there are certain things that we can't talk about, but
Right.
the point for me basically is that when we talk about techno shamanism, it is not, and I call it that way because the idea of the shaman, so to speak, is to connect with the other world and do something in connection with the other world and then get a reaction on this world or a reaction on the other world, right? And do a change here, right? And so basically, or to get a change here through an intermediary in the other world, right? And then just the technology becomes an intermediary. Or if you think about the effect that everyone these days, I mean, think about it. Every child has the powers that not even kings would have dreamt of in their wildest imaginations.
Mm-hmm.
If you take these days, for example, a phone, you swish over it with your thumb, and a couple of hour later, you have a pizza somewhere. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course, you used an app to order something, but imagine this. Imagine that if you would have had this 200 years ago, most likely they would have made an exception to do a very late witch trial, right?
Yes, I would
It's
say
so
so. But
right,
and the way I look at it, I try to approach these things as uncomplicated as possible because I think I told you before, it's like it's a magic trick. You see a
right,
magician on the stage and he's performing this trick, and you're wondering how did he do this? This is truly magic. But once you learn how the trick is performed, once you learn the secret of how he did it, it's no longer magic, and that's how I look at the universe now. I'm being,
right,
I mean, I just look at it, I see it for what it is, and
right.
it's very simple. It really is not that complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically, there is like I'm almost tempted to cite uh, Thor from the Marvel movies that basically said that you call it science and or it's something like you could call it science, and they call it magic. But we come from a place where the same is where both is the same. But this is basically it's a derivation from a much older um, quotation from Arthur C. Clarke, who basically said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right?
Correct. And that's
So
what
in
this
many
is.
ways, exactly, right? That's what I'm saying. So basically, in many ways, magic, the idea of creating a change in the world by will, and shamanism to create a change in the world, so to speak, or in any world,
Mm-hmm.
through a kind of out of yourself experience. And what you basically created with the way that you perceive your operations with radionics, or with especially the Tepaphone. And sorry, we need to go back to the Tepaphone for a second.
It's like
It's
a
a kind of interface, right? It's a kind of interface
yes,
so that
exactly.
basically the
Yeah, and again, I mean, the simple way of putting it, Balin, is it's just it's just another way to to get the job done. It's just a different way of doing it. Do I find it any better or any worse than any other thing that I do? It depends on the application. It's a case by case basis. For example, the helmet that I designed uh, has the Tepaphone built into it so that you can point that carrier wave toward a picture of whoever you're trying to influence. Like you want that new job, or you want that, you got this girl, which I really don't, I really frown against this, but you have this girl that you want to be interested in you, so you can, try to ask her out for a date and get her to, go with you, that kind of a thing. There's a million different things that you can use this technology for. Uh, and a Tepaphone is just merely another thing on there. It's like three or four different things that you have that are being applied toward the outcome of an operation. And the
right.
light that's coming off of that toward a target is just one of many different things that are working in conjunction with each other as part of a system.
Right, it's very interesting because this is basically also a very old thinking, that light of fire is the connection to the other world. If you look
Correct.
at modern scientists, for example, like Nick Bostrom, who speaks about the simulation hypothesis, right, that we live in
Mm-hmm.
a simulation, and then it took it to Silicon Valley gurus who want to create an AGI, artificial general intelligence, which basically is much more intelligent than humans, and which is at one point a kind of godlike creature to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or people like GeoHot, the famous hacker who believes that we can hack the simulation, right? It's very interesting that the old thoughts of basically we live in a kind of virtual reality, which if you look into Bible, God created, and then basically then we get to real life, which is either heaven or hell, or other religions don't believe in this in reincarnation cycle, but they still believe that this is a kind of matrix in which we live, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you think about a Tepaphone, this is a kind of old mechanistic understanding, or as scientists would call it, mechanistic interpretability of that basically you have a sort of influence, and then you can change something in reality to whatever reason, and you use a kind of the technology of your age, the understanding of technology of your age to achieve that. And so basically, Tepaphone, so to speak, comes from that era, and I guess with the latest module that you implemented, it goes more into the quantum computing era, right? So what you think,
Yes,
but
this has gone to the next level. I've already,
oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I tell you another thing too. The handheld Tepaphone that I have, it works identical to the one on the helmet. It just does it in a different way. I think when I did a video on this, I really didn't go into the theory behind it so much, but uh, Charles Casamano said that we have small zones in our or energy zones on our hands. Okay, it's the chakras. We have a small chakra on our hands, and what he would do is project the thought into the chakra on the hand, and from that the device will pick up that energy, that thought, and then once you press the button, you will send an infrared signal, a light. It's a different frequency, but still it's the same. It's the same identical principle as any other type of phone toward a target for influencing, or toward a
Right.
whatever for influencing. That technology again. what I say is that's a shortcut. You could do it the old-fashioned way, like the masters, from a long time ago. They would create balls of energy and create a thought form within that energy and project it, into the universe to have it do a job. I mean, that's where this is coming from. But what I've done here is make it short, make it simple by using Tepaphone technology to help an individual, take care of little things in life that if they happen, it make their life a lot easier. Like that parking space at the store, or having a good or having a good conversation with your
Mm.
boss or what have you. Many different life everyday real life situations, and that's what that's made for. And again, the telephone technology, it works. Hands down, it works. I incorporate it on all of my different operations. No, I don't, because I don't have to. But for
Mm.
certain operations, it does come in handy. It is a very good technology and very flexible. And like I said, I can't poo-poo it because it works.
Right. So basically, I see we just have 1 minute left. So
Oh,
basically,
sure.
I hope that one day I can play with it not only from a scientific point of view, but also convince reviewers of my publications to accept them, because that would be a phenomenal thing for every scientist.
Oh, yes.
Anyhow,
All right. Well,
I hand it over to you, right? Because our
yeah,
time
okay.
runs out.
Well,
You're
first
busy.
off, Dalen, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. And I know it's just one of many shows we're going to be doing in the future. And tonight was the Tepaphone mainly. And even though we veer off, I mean, even when we're off the air, we're always talking about different projects and what have you,
Mm.
and we're getting feedback from each other. And it's just been a very productive relationship that we've formed, and may it continue. But yeah, I wanted to bring you on the air because I've been bragging about you
Mm.
to a lot of people here, and I just want them to get a want them to get a understanding of the the kind of individual that I have to work with here, and I mean that in a complimentary way. And you're just
Okay, thank you very
yeah,
much.
it's just a pleasure. And what I like about it is more times than not when we're talking, we're basically I'm